Imagine living a life where your every action is carefully crafted to please others. Every decision, every word, every gesture carefully calculated to avoid conflict and gain approval. We've all been there at some point, right? Maybe you're the person who's always trying to keep everyone happy, saying yes to every request, and putting your own needs aside because you think that's what it means to be good. But have you ever stopped and asked yourself, is this really what being a good person is all about? Or are you simply sacrificing your own happiness, your own identity, in the name of others' approval? If this resonates with you, then you're not alone. Many people live their entire lives trying to please others, thinking that this is the key to happiness and success. But here's the truth. Constantly trying to be the good person often leads to frustration, burnout, and a feeling of being invisible. We lose touch with who we are, we lose our sense of self-worth, and in the process, we may even start to resent the very people we're trying to please. In today's video, we're going to challenge everything you think you know about being good and show you how you can start living authentically, setting clear boundaries, and finally stepping into your true power. It's time to break free from the people-pleasing cycle and reclaim your life. We'll discuss how to shift your mindset from always saying yes to prioritizing yourself, how to stand firm in your own values, and why being true to yourself will not only make you stronger, but will also lead to deeper, more meaningful connections with the people around you. But before we dive into this transformation, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Your support helps this community grow. And if you find value in what we're talking about today, consider leaving a super thanks to show your appreciation and help fund more great content like this. Now, let's get started. Throughout our lives, many of us carry a heavy, invisible burden, one that we don't often acknowledge, but which weighs on us daily. It's a weight we've been taught to bear from an early age, and it manifests in the expectations placed upon us by society. These expectations demand that we play a specific role, one that aligns with the idea of being good. From the time we were children, we learn that being good means being polite, selfless, agreeable, and never standing out. We are conditioned to believe that the more we conform to these ideals, the more we will be liked and accepted. But in the process, we often forget to ask ourselves what it means for us to be good, and whether this definition truly serves our happiness or well-being. When we are young, we are told to be nice to others, to share, to always think of others before ourselves, and to put others' needs above our own. It is ingrained in us that this is the path to social success, approval, and love. However, the problem is that we're never really taught how to set boundaries, how to protect our own needs, or how to say no without feeling guilty. We are trained to silence ourselves, to shrink in order to fit into the mold that others have set for us. We aren't taught to assert ourselves or to recognize the importance of self-respect. Instead, we learn that our value is measured by how easy we are to deal with, how much we can accommodate others without complaining, how much we can sacrifice without asking for anything in return. This pressure to always be good, to be the person who is always helpful and always available, leads to exhaustion. It creates a constant inner tension between what we want for ourselves and what we feel obligated to give others. The more we give, the more we are expected to give. The more we accommodate, the less we are valued. We become stuck in a cycle of self-sacrifice that slowly erodes our sense of identity and personal fulfillment. We begin to lose track of who we really are because we're so focused on trying to meet everyone else's expectations. This invisible weight grows heavier over time, and eventually, we find ourselves wondering, when is it my turn? When do I get to set the terms? When do my needs matter? The answer, for many of us, is never. We were never taught to ask for what we need, to stand up for ourselves, or to recognize that it is okay to take up space in this world without apologizing for it. As a result, we find ourselves in a constant state of depletion. We say yes to everything, not because we want to, but because we feel like we have to. We believe that if we don't comply with others' wishes, we will be seen as selfish, unkind, or difficult. We fear that by not being good, we will be rejected, abandoned, or left behind. This is not just a personal struggle, it's a societal one. We live in a culture that often values politeness over honesty, conformity over individuality, and selflessness over self-care. From the moment we are born, we are taught to be good, to follow the rules, to fit in. But no one ever tells us that being good often comes at the cost of our mental, emotional, and physical well-being. No one tells us that by constantly trying to please others, we are slowly losing ourselves. We are so focused on being agreeable and fitting in that we forget that it's okay to say no, to disagree, to assert our boundaries. We are conditioned to think that if we stop being nice, we'll lose everything: love, acceptance, connection. But in reality, by continuing to suppress ourselves, we lose the most important thing: our own authenticity. Take, for example, the workplace. Many of us have had jobs where we felt like we needed to constantly go above and beyond, not because it was necessary for the work itself, but because we were afraid of not being liked or valued. We said yes to extra projects, stayed late to help colleagues, and sacrificed our own personal time, all in the name of being a team player. We did this because we believed that our value was tied to our ability to be helpful, to be accommodating. But in the end, what did we get in return? Perhaps a pat on the back, a thank you, but not the respect or recognition we truly deserved. We weren't valued for our skills or contributions. We were simply valued for being available, for being willing to sacrifice ourselves for others. Over time, this takes a toll on our mental health. We start to feel invisible, unnoticed, and exhausted. We begin to question our worth, wondering why we're always the ones giving but never receiving. The same pattern can be seen in personal relationships. Think about friendships or romantic relationships where you've always been the one to compromise, to give in, to make the other person happy. Perhaps you've ignored your own needs, your own desires, in order to keep the peace or avoid conflict. You've told yourself that it's okay to be the one who makes all the sacrifices because that's what it means to be a good friend or partner. But over time, this dynamic can become draining. You start to feel resentful, not because the other person is asking too much, but because you've allowed them to take advantage of your kindness. You've taught them that it's okay to expect things from you without reciprocating. In these situations, you may even start to feel like you're losing yourself, like you don't know who you are outside of your role as the good friend or partner. This sense of self-erasure can be suffocating, and it's hard to break free from once it's been ingrained in you. Ultimately, the desire to be good, to be liked, to be agreeable often leads to a sense of powerlessness. We feel like we have no control over our own lives because we are constantly living in response to the expectations and desires of others. We may think that by being good, we are building relationships, fostering connection, and earning love. But in reality, we're building a prison for ourselves, one where we are stuck playing a role that doesn't reflect who we truly are. What is the solution to this? The first step is recognizing that the weight we carry is not ours to bear. We need to understand that it is okay to put ourselves first sometimes, to say no when we need to, and to stop being afraid of what others might think of us. We are not obligated to be nice at the expense of our own happiness or well-being. It's important to recognize that self-care is not selfishness. We are allowed to take up space in this world, to express our needs, to set boundaries, and to live authentically without apologizing for it. By doing so, we begin to reclaim our power. We begin to realize that we are not here to please others, we are here to live our own lives on our own terms. And that is the true path to happiness, fulfillment, and respect. It's a difficult journey, and it doesn't happen overnight. But it starts with acknowledging that the weight we carry is not a necessary part of who we are. From recognizing our worth and our right to exist fully and unapologetically in this world, there's a quiet, often unspoken toll that comes with constantly saying yes to everyone around us. It seems harmless at first. After all, helping others, agreeing to their requests, and making ourselves available when they need us is what good, considerate people do, right? However, this seemingly innocuous behavior carries a hidden cost. The more we say yes to others, the more we stretch ourselves thin, and yet, the less we seem to get in return. What we fail to realize is that by constantly putting others' needs before our own, we begin to lose touch with our own feelings, desires, and boundaries. We end up running on empty, yet are left feeling unseen and unappreciated. The act of always saying yes might start with the best of intentions. We want to help others, to be supportive, and to be the person everyone can count on. But what happens when we neglect our own needs for the sake of others? Over time, it's easy to find ourselves overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and worse, taken for granted. We give and give, thinking that our efforts will eventually be recognized, but what we often find is that people take our generosity for granted. The truth is that when we constantly say yes, we lose control over our time and energy. Others begin to expect us to always be there for them, no matter the cost to ourselves. Take a moment to think about your daily life, whether it's at work, at home, or in your personal relationships. How often do you agree to things you don't really want to do? Perhaps a friend asks you for a favor, and you agree without hesitation, even though you have a full plate yourself. Maybe your boss asks you to take on an extra project, and despite feeling overwhelmed, you say yes, hoping that your efforts will be noticed and appreciated. Or perhaps your family expects you to always be available to listen to their problems, and without thinking, you make yourself available to them, even though you're emotionally drained. In these situations, the initial act of saying yes comes from a place of wanting to help, to be kind, and to be seen as a good person. However, over time, it becomes clear that while we're giving more of ourselves, we are not receiving the same level of consideration in return. The exhaustion builds, and we start to feel invisible. We may be physically present, but we are emotionally and mentally worn out. Our energy is drained, and our sense of self becomes more and more blurred as we try to live up to the expectations of others. The root of this behavior often lies in the desire to be liked and accepted. We want to be the person who is always there for others, the one who is reliable, the one who never says no. We fear that if we set boundaries or say no, we will be seen as selfish, unkind, or difficult. But in reality, this fear keeps us trapped in a cycle of self-sacrifice that does more harm than good. The more we say yes to others, the more we lose ourselves. The more we give without receiving, the less we are valued. People may appreciate our help in the moment, but they don't recognize the emotional toll it takes on us. Think about a time when you've been the go-to person for others. Maybe you've always been the friend who listens, the colleague who volunteers, or the family member who takes care of everyone else's needs. How often did you feel genuinely appreciated for your efforts? How many times did you sacrifice your own time, energy, or happiness for the sake of others, only to be left feeling drained and unrecognized? More often than not, the answer is that you didn't feel appreciated, not in the way you wanted to be. People were grateful for what you did, but they didn't truly see the cost of your constant availability. This is where the real problem lies. When we're always available, when we're always willing to help, we create an unspoken expectation that we will continue to do so, regardless of how we feel. Over time, our value becomes tied not to who we are or what we contribute, but to our availability. We become like an appliance in the background of people's lives, always there when needed, but easily overlooked when we're not. The problem is that when we constantly say yes, we teach others to take us for granted. We train them to expect us to always be available, and this erodes our own sense of self-worth. For example, consider the workplace. Many employees feel pressure to always say yes to their bosses, even when the requests are unreasonable or when they are already overwhelmed. They fear that if they say no, they'll be seen as uncooperative or lazy. They believe that if they keep saying yes, they will be noticed, they will advance, and they will gain respect. But the truth is that the more they say yes without setting boundaries, the less they are valued. Their boss may continue to ask for more work, but the employee's contribution becomes expected, not appreciated. Over time, this leads to burnout, frustration, and a sense of being stuck in a cycle of endless self-sacrifice. Similarly, in personal relationships, we often find ourselves agreeing to do things for others, even when it's not in our best interest. We might agree to meet a friend who always needs emotional support, even when we are exhausted ourselves. Or we might say yes to a family member who constantly asks for favors, even though it's taking a toll on our mental health. In these situations, our kindness is often mistaken for weakness, and our willingness to help is taken for granted. The more we give, the less our needs are acknowledged, and eventually, we end up feeling invisible, our efforts unrecognized, and our emotional resources depleted. The cycle of always saying yes is not just emotionally draining, it's also mentally exhausting. It keeps us stuck in a pattern of people pleasing and self-erasure. We lose sight of what we truly want or need, as we are constantly focused on fulfilling the needs of others. This leads to a deep sense of frustration and resentment, because while we're doing everything to make others happy, we're not receiving the same level of care or consideration in return. We may be surrounded by people, but we feel isolated and unimportant. Our sense of self-worth becomes tied to our ability to please others, rather than to who we truly are as individuals. In essence, the price we pay for always saying yes is the loss of our own identity. We lose touch with our own desires, boundaries, and needs. We become so focused on fulfilling the expectations of others that we forget to take care of ourselves. This behavior creates an invisible barrier between who we really are and who we've been trained to be, the good person who always says yes, who always sacrifices, and who never complains. But the truth is, this person is not our true self. It's a role we've learned to play, one that requires constant energy and effort, without ever truly replenishing our own emotional reserves. It's a necessary step towards self-preservation and self-respect. We must acknowledge that it's okay to take care of ourselves first, to say no when we are overwhelmed, and to recognize that our worth is not defined by how much we give to others. By doing this, we can regain control over our time, our energy, and our sense of self. We can become more authentic in our relationships, more effective in our work, and more at peace with ourselves. The price of always saying yes is too high, and it's time to stop paying it. There's a quiet but incredibly heavy cost to the constant habit of saying yes to everything around us. It's the invisible burden we carry when we try to please everyone else, often at the expense of our own well-being. We tell ourselves that it's just a part of being a good person, being helpful, kind, agreeable. We think that saying yes will bring us acceptance, recognition, and gratitude. However, what we don't often see is that by saying yes all the time, we not only deplete our emotional reserves, but also put ourselves in a position where our needs, our feelings, and our voices become invisible. When we say yes without considering the toll it takes on us, we enter into a cycle of self-sacrifice. This cycle doesn't just impact our energy levels or our mental health, but also affects how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us. We begin to tie our sense of worth to how much we give, to how much we do for others, and how much we sacrifice to keep the peace. The problem with this is that the more we give, the less we are seen for who we truly are. People may appreciate the help, the kindness, the reliability, but they often forget to recognize the person behind the yes. They fail to acknowledge the emotional toll it takes to constantly be available, to always put others first, and to never set boundaries. In every aspect of life, from personal relationships to work, the pattern plays out similarly. Think about work, for example. Many employees constantly say yes when asked to take on additional tasks or responsibilities, even when their plate is already full. They do it because they want to be seen as team players, to be valued for their contributions. They hope that by showing how willing they are to help, they'll be appreciated, maybe even promoted or recognized for their efforts. But in reality, saying yes without boundaries leads to exhaustion, burnout, and a feeling of being taken for granted. The more someone says yes, the more they are asked to do, and the less appreciation they receive in return. Their work becomes expected, not valued, and as a result, their contributions lose significance. The same happens in personal relationships. Think about a situation where you're always the one who agrees to do things for others, whether it's helping a friend move, listening to someone vent about their problems, or sacrificing your own plans to accommodate others. Initially, it feels good to be needed, to feel like you're making a difference. But over time, this behavior can take a toll. When you're always available, always giving, people start to expect it. They may come to rely on you, not because they truly appreciate your time or effort, but because you've trained them to believe that you'll always say yes. In doing so, you lose your own sense of importance, your own sense of self-worth, because you're no longer valued for who you are, but for what you can do for others. This pattern is especially common in friendships and romantic relationships. The person who always says yes is often the one who is relied upon the most. However, in many cases, this reliance is not based on mutual respect or reciprocity. It's based on the assumption that you will always be there, always willing to help, always sacrificing your own needs for the sake of others. Over time, this dynamic can cause frustration, resentment, and a sense of invisibility. When you're always the one giving, when your needs are never considered, it becomes difficult to maintain a sense of connection and authenticity in the relationship. You begin to feel like you're just a tool or resource for someone else, rather than a valued person in your own right. In these situations, the price we pay for always being available is not just the physical exhaustion of doing things for others, but the emotional toll of feeling unappreciated. People may thank you. They may acknowledge your help, but that doesn't equate to true recognition or respect. Respect comes from understanding boundaries, from knowing that someone's time and energy are valuable and should not be taken for granted. When we constantly say yes without considering our own limits, we are teaching others that we don't have boundaries, that our time doesn't matter as much as theirs, and that we will always be there to pick up the slack. This dynamic can also manifest in the workplace, where employees may feel pressure to say yes to extra assignments or tasks, even when they are overwhelmed or not interested. They may do so in an attempt to gain approval or avoid being seen as lazy or uncooperative. The desire to be liked, to be seen as the hardworking, dependable employee, often overrides the need to set boundaries or take care of personal well-being. But this mindset can backfire. The more someone says yes to things that don't align with their goals or values, the more they risk burning out. And when burnout hits, they're often left feeling unnoticed, unappreciated, and exhausted, without having gained any significant recognition or advancement in return. The problem is that saying yes constantly is not sustainable. It eventually leads to resentment, a loss of motivation, and a sense of disillusionment with a system that expects you to keep saying yes without consideration for your well-being. The danger of always being the person who says yes is that it erodes our sense of self-respect. When we say yes all the time, we're essentially saying that other people's needs are more important than our own. We begin to believe that our worth is measured by how much we can give, by how much we can do for others. But the truth is that self-respect comes from knowing when to say no. It comes from understanding that we are worthy of love, respect, and care, not because of what we can do for others, but because of who we are as individuals. By constantly saying yes, we forget that we are valuable simply by existing. It's important to recognize that saying no does not make us selfish or unkind. In fact, it's the opposite. Saying no is an act of self-care and self-respect. It's a way to protect our emotional and mental health, to ensure that we are not constantly running on empty, trying to meet the expectations of everyone else. Setting boundaries allows us to preserve our energy for the things and people that truly matter. It allows us to take care of ourselves, to recharge, and to be present in the moments that bring us joy and fulfillment. So, the next time you're asked to do something that doesn't align with your values or feels like too much, it's important to remember that it's okay to say no. It's okay to prioritize your own needs, to set limits, and to recognize that your time and energy are valuable. When we start saying no to things that drain us, we start saying yes to ourselves. And in doing so, we not only protect our own well-being, but we also teach others to respect us and our boundaries. We begin to reclaim our time, our energy, and our sense of self-worth. And that is the true cost of always saying yes, the price we pay when we neglect ourselves for the sake of others. It's a price we no longer have to pay. Niccolo Machiavelli is often regarded as one of the most controversial figures in political philosophy. For centuries, he has been vilified as the embodiment of ruthless political cunning, primarily due to the interpretation of his most famous work, The Prince. This book, often seen as a guide to gaining and maintaining political power, has led to the popular association of Machiavelli with deception, manipulation, and ruthless ambition. However, such a simplistic view of Machiavelli fails to capture the depth of his philosophy. Instead of being merely an advocate of power for power's sake, Machiavelli was a strategic thinker who understood that true leadership and respect come not from being good in a traditional sense, but from establishing a strong presence, setting clear boundaries, and adhering to principles that lead to effective action. Machiavelli was not the villain he's often portrayed as. Far from advocating cruelty or immoral behavior, his philosophy was grounded in pragmatism and realism. He understood that politics, like life, is not always black and white. In his time, Italy was fragmented, and its various states were constantly at war, both internally and with each other. This environment shaped his views on power, leadership, and human nature. He saw that often, the most virtuous individuals, those who adhered strictly to moral codes, were not the ones who thrived in the complex, ever-changing world of politics. Instead, it was the strategic and the pragmatic who succeeded. One of Machiavelli's core ideas was that respect and power are not granted simply through virtue or goodness. Instead, power is often earned through presence, through the ability to command respect, and through the willingness to do what is necessary for the greater good, even if it requires making difficult decisions. In The Prince, Machiavelli argued that a ruler must be willing to act decisively and strategically, sometimes even at the expense of traditional notions of morality. For example, he famously stated that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved, if they cannot be both. This does not mean that the ruler should be cruel or tyrannical for the sake of cruelty, but rather that they should ensure their authority is respected and their leadership is effective. What Machiavelli understood, more than anyone else in his time, was that effective leadership is about balancing power and perception. A ruler who is seen as weak, indecisive, or overly compassionate will lose the respect of their people and their peers. This is because respect is not something that can be earned simply by doing good deeds or following moral guidelines. It must be earned through strength, decisiveness, and the ability to command authority in a world that is often unpredictable and chaotic. Machiavelli's advice to leaders was not about being liked or loved, but about ensuring that their presence was felt and that their actions aligned with their goals. Machiavelli's view of power was not rooted in blind ambition or the pursuit of dominance for its own sake. Rather, it was about understanding that power is a tool, a means to achieve an end. This end could be political stability, the prosperity of the state, or the protection of the people. But power, in Machiavelli's view, was essential for achieving these goals. Without power, even the most virtuous individual is powerless to effect change. This is why Machiavelli emphasizes that effectiveness is more important than moral purity. A ruler who is too focused on being virtuous and adhering to traditional moral standards may fail to act decisively when the situation calls for it. In contrast, a ruler who understands when to act pragmatically and strategically is better equipped to navigate the complexities of leadership. One of the key insights in Machiavelli's philosophy is that leadership and power are not about pleasing everyone or being universally liked. The idea that we should always be good, agreeable, and self-sacrificing is a concept that clashes with the reality of leadership. In life, much like in politics, respect does not come from being overly nice or accommodating to the point of self-erasure. Rather, it comes from having boundaries, from knowing when to stand firm and when to let go, from being willing to make difficult decisions when necessary. This understanding of leadership has profound implications for both personal and professional life. In our everyday interactions, we are often taught to be agreeable, to please others, and to put the needs of others ahead of our own. We are told that being nice will lead to respect, success, and happiness. However, as many people eventually realize, this approach doesn't always work. In fact, the more we try to please others, the less we are respected. People begin to see us as doormats, as people who will always say yes regardless of the cost. In this sense, being good in the traditional sense can often lead to exhaustion, frustration, and a lack of recognition. This is where Machiavelli's philosophy offers valuable insight. Machiavelli's work challenges us to rethink our approach to power, success, and respect. Instead of trying to be liked or revered for our kindness or goodness, we should focus on building a strong presence, setting boundaries, and taking decisive action. In both personal and professional settings, it's not the person who is always agreeable or self-sacrificing who earns respect. It's the person who knows when to say no, when to assert themselves, and when to take action that earns the admiration of others. This isn't to say that kindness and empathy should be discarded, but rather that they should be tempered with strength and the ability to draw boundaries when necessary. Think of a leader in the workplace, for example. The most successful leaders are often not the ones who bend over backward to make everyone happy. Rather, they are the ones who are clear about their expectations, who establish firm boundaries, and who are not afraid to make tough decisions when needed. These leaders command respect because they are consistent, strategic, and decisive. They are not afraid to take charge, even when their actions may not be popular with everyone. By doing so, they create an environment of stability and confidence that enables others to follow them. This is the kind of leadership that Machiavelli advocates, leadership that is based on power and respect, not on trying to please everyone. Machiavelli's ideas about power and leadership also apply to personal relationships. In friendships, family dynamics, and romantic relationships, we often find ourselves trying to please others, to be the one who is always available, always willing to help. But as we've seen, this approach can lead to burnout, resentment, and a lack of respect. To have healthy, meaningful relationships, it's important to establish boundaries and to communicate our needs clearly. We must learn when to say no, when to stand firm in our convictions, and when to prioritize our own well-being. By doing so, we not only protect ourselves, but also create a foundation for respect and trust in our relationships. In essence, Machiavelli's philosophy teaches us that being good is not enough. Effectiveness, decisiveness, and the ability to command respect are far more important for achieving success and fulfillment. By embracing Machiavelli's ideas, we can shift our mindset from trying to please others and seeking approval to focusing on building a strong, respected presence that allows us to achieve our goals while maintaining our integrity. This does not mean we must abandon kindness or virtue, but rather that we must learn to balance these qualities with strength, strategic thinking, and the ability to set boundaries. Ultimately, Machiavelli's ideas offer a framework for success that is grounded in realism, practicality, and the understanding that true power comes from having the ability to act decisively and strategically, not from trying to conform to the expectations of others. There's a price to be paid for silence, particularly the silence that we keep in place to maintain peace, avoid conflict, or make others feel comfortable. At first glance, silence may seem like a harmless or even noble choice after all. Who wants to be the one to stir up tension or cause discomfort? However, when silence becomes a habit, especially when it is used to suppress our true thoughts, feelings, and boundaries, it begins to take a significant emotional and psychological toll. The consequences of prolonged silence can be far-reaching, affecting not only how we are seen by others, but also how we see ourselves. When we remain silent for too long, we risk becoming invisible in the eyes of others. Silence, in this context, doesn't reflect a peaceful or thoughtful demeanor. Instead, it signals to others that we are passive, that we are willing to accept whatever comes our way, and that our needs and opinions don't matter. This is especially true in relationships, whether personal or professional. In an attempt to keep things smooth and avoid rocking the boat, we may find ourselves saying nothing when something bothers us or when our boundaries are crossed. At first, this seems like an easy way to keep the peace, but over time, it erodes our sense of self-worth. People begin to see us as a resource to be used rather than as an individual with needs, desires, and a voice that deserves to be heard. For example, consider the dynamic in a workplace where one person is always quiet, never voicing their opinions or standing up for themselves. At first, this individual may be seen as easygoing, someone who doesn't create problems. However, as time goes on, their silence is interpreted as compliance, and their contributions are often overlooked. They become invisible in meetings, their ideas ignored, and their efforts taken for granted. This person is no longer seen as a valuable team member. They are seen as someone who could be depended upon to stay quiet, to not cause any waves. In this scenario, silence doesn't lead to respect or appreciation. It leads to being used. The longer the silence persists, the less likely it is that the person will ever be noticed or valued for their true worth. In personal relationships, the consequences of silence can be even more profound. Many people stay quiet to avoid conflict, hoping that by not expressing their feelings, they can maintain harmony. However, this approach can backfire. The more we stay silent, the more our needs and feelings go unaddressed. Over time, the other person may begin to take us for granted, assuming that we are always okay with whatever is happening because we never speak up. This creates a toxic dynamic where one person is giving and the other is taking, without any sense of balance or reciprocity. The silent person becomes a doormat, constantly giving without ever getting what they need in return. Imagine a romantic relationship where one partner is always the one to compromise, to keep quiet when something bothers them, to go along with whatever the other person wants. Initially, this might seem like a sign of love or understanding. However, over time, the silent partner begins to feel frustrated and resentful because their own needs are being ignored. The other partner may not even realize that something is wrong because the silent partner hasn't spoken up. The result is a growing emotional distance, a sense of invisibility, and an eventual breakdown in communication. Silence, in this case, is not an expression of understanding or peace. It's a form of self-erasure, where one person's needs and feelings are continually suppressed. The problem with silence, particularly when it is used to avoid conflict or keep the peace, is that it leads to a gradual loss of self-respect. When we do not speak up for ourselves, we begin to send a message to others and to ourselves that our thoughts, feelings, and boundaries don't matter. Over time, this can lead to feelings of powerlessness, frustration, and even resentment. We may start to feel like we don't have a voice, that we are not worthy of being heard, and that our needs are less important than the needs of others. This emotional and psychological toll can be devastating, leading to a sense of disconnection, both from ourselves and from the people around us. Furthermore, silence can be a tool of manipulation. While we may believe that we're simply trying to avoid conflict or keep things calm, our silence can sometimes be used against us. People may begin to take advantage of our unwillingness to speak up, knowing that we won't challenge them or set boundaries. This creates an unhealthy dynamic where one person is always giving and the other is always taking. The person who remains silent is often seen as weak, passive, or non-threatening, which may make it easier for others to manipulate or control them. This can lead to a cycle of self-sacrifice, where the silent person continues to give without receiving anything in return, becoming emotionally drained and resentful. For example, in a work environment, if someone is always silent and never advocates for themselves, they may find that their workload increases, their boundaries are crossed, and their personal time is taken for granted. They may not speak up because they want to be seen as cooperative or easygoing. But this silence only results in them being overloaded, overlooked, and undervalued. Eventually, they may feel like they have no control over their own life, as their time and energy are constantly being dictated by others. This is a direct consequence of remaining silent for too long by not speaking up and setting clear boundaries. We allow others to dictate our lives. The consequences of silence are not always immediate. In fact, they often build up gradually, accumulating over time until we are left feeling emotionally drained, disconnected, and invisible. But when we fail to express ourselves, to speak up when something is wrong, or to establish healthy boundaries, we teach others that it's okay to disregard our needs. We become people who are used rather than respected. This can lead to a deep sense of frustration and disillusionment, especially when we realize that the silence we kept in order to avoid conflict or maintain peace has ultimately left us feeling isolated and unimportant. There is a dangerous myth that silence equals understanding. Many people believe that by staying quiet, they are showing maturity or empathy, especially in situations where tension or disagreement could arise. However, silence is not always a sign of peace or wisdom. It can also be a sign of fear or insecurity. It can indicate that we are afraid to assert ourselves, afraid of conflict, or afraid of how others might react if we speak our truth. This fear of speaking up can be deeply ingrained, often stemming from childhood experiences or cultural conditioning that teaches us to stay quiet in the face of discomfort. The longer we stay silent, the harder it becomes to break free from this pattern. Over time, silence becomes a habit, and our voice becomes weaker, less confident. We begin to lose touch with our own needs and desires, and we become increasingly disconnected from ourselves and others. We may feel like we are living a life that is not our own, one that is shaped by the expectations and desires of others, rather than by our own authentic voice. The solution, then, is to recognize that silence is not always the answer. While it may be tempting to stay quiet to avoid conflict, we must understand that speaking up is essential for maintaining healthy relationships and preserving our own sense of self. When we fail to express our needs, desires, and boundaries, we allow others to take control of our lives. But when we begin to speak up, when we begin to assert ourselves and make our needs known, we reclaim our power. We show others that our thoughts and feelings matter, and we set the tone for how we want to be treated. Breaking the habit of silence requires courage and self-awareness. It requires us to acknowledge that our voice is important and that our needs are just as valid as anyone else's. It requires us to let go of the fear of conflict and to embrace the discomfort that often comes with standing up for ourselves. But when we do, we begin to experience the freedom that comes with being true to ourselves. We stop being invisible and start being seen, respected, and valued for who we truly are. Fear of rejection is an incredibly powerful force that shapes much of our behavior, often without us even realizing it. It's deeply ingrained in us from an early age and affects how we interact with others, how we view ourselves, and even how we make decisions. From childhood, we are taught that acceptance and love are contingent upon our ability to please others, to fit in, and to avoid standing out. This conditioning becomes so internalized that it begins to dictate how we behave in almost every social interaction. The underlying fear of being rejected or misunderstood can create a loop of self-sacrifice, where we continuously put the needs of others ahead of our own, hoping that by doing so, we will earn the love and acceptance we crave. In many ways, this fear of rejection is a survival mechanism. As humans, we are social creatures, and our sense of belonging and connection is crucial to our emotional well-being. Historically, being cast out from a group could mean isolation, loss of resources, and even danger. Therefore, it makes sense that we would be wired to seek acceptance and avoid rejection at all costs. However, in modern society, this instinct can become maladaptive. The fear of rejection can cause us to prioritize the approval of others over our own happiness, leading us to compromise our values, ignore our needs, and continually sacrifice ourselves in the hope of keeping others happy. One of the most common manifestations of this fear is the tendency to always say yes to others, even when it's not in our best interest. We agree to do things we don't want to do, to give more of ourselves than we can afford, and to tolerate behaviors that make us uncomfortable, all in the hopes of maintaining harmony and avoiding conflict. We convince ourselves that if we say no or assert our own boundaries, we will be seen as selfish, unkind, or difficult. This fear of rejection can make us feel as though we have no choice but to please others, even at the expense of our own well-being. For example, in a workplace setting, many people fear that if they don't agree to every request from their boss or colleagues, they will be seen as uncooperative or lazy. This fear often leads to overcommitment, burnout, and frustration. Even when the workload becomes unmanageable, they continue to say yes to every additional task, hoping that their efforts will be noticed and rewarded. However, this behavior rarely results in genuine appreciation or recognition. Instead, it often leads to exhaustion, resentment, and a diminished sense of self-worth. The more we give in this way, the less we are respected for our skills and contributions, and the more we are seen as a resource to be used, rather than a valued individual. Similarly, in personal relationships, fear of rejection can lead to a pattern of self-sacrifice, where one person consistently puts the needs of others before their own. This might manifest as always being the one to listen to a friend's problems, even when you are struggling yourself, or constantly giving in to a partner's desires, even when they conflict with your own. At first, this behavior might seem like an expression of love and care, but over time, it can lead to feelings of resentment and frustration. The person who is constantly giving may start to feel invisible, as though their needs are never acknowledged or respected. They may also begin to feel as though they are being used, rather than appreciated for who they are. The fear of rejection also shows up in how we seek validation from others. In a world dominated by social media, it's easy to see how this fear can drive our behavior. Many people post photos, share their opinions, or seek approval from others, hoping to receive likes, comments, or positive feedback. This validation from others becomes a way of reinforcing our self-worth. However, when we rely too heavily on external validation, we can become trapped in a cycle of seeking approval, never truly feeling secure in ourselves unless others are affirming us. This cycle of validation seeking is rooted in the fear of rejection, the belief that if we don't receive the approval of others, we will be rejected or left behind. At the core of this behavior is a deeply held belief that our worth is determined by how others perceive us. We become so focused on pleasing others, on making sure that everyone is happy with us, that we forget that true self-worth comes from within. When we live in constant fear of rejection, we give up our power. We allow other people's opinions of us to dictate how we feel about ourselves. We become trapped in a never-ending cycle of trying to earn approval and acceptance, never fully realizing that we already have the right to be loved and accepted just as we are. This fear can also manifest in a reluctance to express our true feelings and opinions. We may withhold our thoughts, pretending to agree with others, even when we don't. We may smile and nod when we don't feel like it, or keep quiet when we disagree, all in the hopes of avoiding conflict or rejection. Over time, this pattern of silence and compliance can lead to a loss of our authentic selves. We begin to suppress our true thoughts and desires, and we lose touch with who we really are. In doing so, we not only fail to express our own needs, but we also fail to cultivate relationships that are built on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. This cycle of self-sacrifice, driven by the fear of rejection, is not just emotionally draining, it's also unhealthy. It leads to a diminished sense of self-esteem, as we continuously place others' needs above our own. We begin to believe that we are only valuable if we are constantly helping others, if we are constantly accommodating and pleasing them. This belief is damaging because it makes us forget that our worth is not contingent upon how much we give to others, but rather on the fact that we are worthy of love and respect simply because we exist. The consequences of this fear of rejection extend far beyond our emotional well-being. It can also affect our physical health. Constantly saying yes to others and neglecting our own needs can lead to stress, anxiety, and burnout. When we are afraid of rejection, we may push ourselves too hard, take on too much, and ignore the signals our bodies send us that we need rest or care. This creates a state of constant tension, where we are always living for others and never for ourselves. The result is a feeling of being trapped by the expectations of others, trapped by our own fear of rejection, and trapped by the belief that our worth is tied to how much we can give. Breaking free from this fear of rejection requires a shift in mindset. It requires us to realize that our worth is not determined by the approval of others. It's not about being liked or loved by everyone we meet. It's about being true to ourselves and setting boundaries that protect our emotional and physical well-being. We must learn to say no when necessary, to express our needs, and to stop living in constant fear of being rejected. The first step in overcoming this fear is acknowledging that it exists. We need to become aware of the patterns in our behavior, how often we say yes when we want to say no, how often we suppress our true feelings to avoid conflict, and how much of our self-worth is tied to external validation. Once we recognize these patterns, we can start to change them. We can practice saying no without guilt, expressing our opinions honestly, and taking care of our own needs without fear of rejection. In doing so, we not only protect ourselves, but also begin to build more authentic relationships. When we stop trying to please everyone and start living in alignment with our true selves, we attract people who appreciate us for who we really are, not just for what we can do for them. We stop living in fear of rejection and start living in the freedom that comes from self-acceptance. The fear of rejection is a powerful force, but it is not insurmountable. By recognizing it, challenging it, and taking steps to protect our sense of self-worth, we can break free from the cycle of self-sacrifice and begin to live a life that is more aligned with who we truly are. In doing so, we not only stop living in fear of rejection, but we also start to embrace the freedom that comes with being unapologetically ourselves. Niccolò Machiavelli, often misunderstood as a figure who solely advocated for ruthless power tactics, actually offered profound insights into leadership, respect, and human nature. His writings, particularly in The Prince, have been misinterpreted by many as a manual for manipulation, but a closer look reveals that Machiavelli was not endorsing tyranny or deception for its own sake. Rather, he was offering a candid and pragmatic view of the world, one that prioritized strength, clarity, and decisiveness. Above all, Machiavelli understood that true respect doesn't come from being nice or constantly trying to please others. It comes from establishing clear boundaries, standing firm in one's beliefs, and setting the tone for how others should treat you. The key to earning respect, according to Machiavelli, lies not in being good or virtuous, but in maintaining a strong presence and holding yourself to high standards. One of the central tenets of Machiavelli's philosophy is that respect is not something that can be begged for or earned through mere kindness or compliance. The traditional belief that if we are simply good enough, kind enough, or helpful enough, we will be rewarded with respect is a fallacy. In reality, respect is born from clarity and consequence. It's not about bending over backwards to meet others' expectations or making endless sacrifices for the sake of others' comfort. Instead, it's about knowing who you are, what you stand for, and making that clear to others through your actions and decisions. To understand this, consider a situation at work. There's often a culture in many organizations where the most likable person, the one who says yes to everything and never complains, is seen as the most valuable. This person is the one who stays late, takes on extra tasks, and accommodates everyone's needs. While this behavior might earn temporary approval, it doesn't necessarily earn respect. Over time, the person who is always available and always agreeable becomes predictable, dependable, but rarely esteemed. Their actions are expected, and their value is taken for granted. The key issue here is that these individuals often avoid conflict, make themselves overly available, and suppress their own needs, all in the name of being seen as helpful or good. While this may gain them some superficial approval, it does not earn them the deeper respect that comes with authority, strength, and boundaries. Machiavelli, in contrast, emphasized the importance of being clear about your intentions and limits. In his view, people are more likely to respect someone who knows their worth and stands firm in their decisions, even when those decisions are not universally liked. This approach doesn't require cruelty or manipulation. It simply requires clarity. When you make your boundaries known and enforce them consistently, you set a tone that commands respect. People may not always agree with you or like you, but they will recognize your strength, your self-respect, and your ability to make decisions that are not swayed by external pressures. In fact, one of Machiavelli's key insights is that it is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. This doesn't mean being cruel or malicious. Rather, it means ensuring that your authority is recognized and that your actions have consequences. Fear, in Machiavelli's terms, is about making sure that people know you will not tolerate being disrespected or taken advantage of. It is not about instilling terror, but about maintaining a presence that demands attention and respect. People respect those who set boundaries and hold themselves accountable. This is a powerful form of leadership, one that inspires respect not through kindness or submission, but through clarity of purpose and the courage to enforce one's principles. This concept of clarity and consequence can be applied in our personal lives as well. Consider the dynamics in friendships or romantic relationships. Many of us are conditioned to believe that in order to keep relationships healthy, we must constantly accommodate others, suppress our own needs, and avoid confrontation. While compromise and understanding are essential in any relationship, there is a point where these behaviors become self-sacrificial. When we consistently place others' needs ahead of our own, when we constantly say yes to keep the peace, we start to lose our sense of self. We stop communicating our desires, our frustrations, and our limits, and as a result, our relationships may become imbalanced, one-sided, and ultimately unsatisfying. Machiavelli's lesson here is simple. Relationships thrive when both parties respect each other's boundaries and understand each other's values. Just as a leader commands respect through clarity and consequence, individuals in relationships should set clear boundaries and express their needs. It's about understanding that being kind, accommodating, and helpful is important, but it must be balanced with the ability to assert yourself and communicate your needs. When you hold your ground and make it clear what you will and will not tolerate, you force others to respect you, not because of your willingness to please, but because of your commitment to your own values and principles. Think about a situation where someone might constantly ask for your time, your energy, or your resources without considering your own needs. If you always give in, hoping to be liked or appreciated, you may find that the other person takes your willingness for granted. They begin to expect your help without offering anything in return, and over time, the dynamic becomes unhealthy. However, if you establish a boundary early on, communicating that you are willing to help, but only when it aligns with your own priorities and availability, you create a relationship based on mutual respect. You show that you value yourself enough to set limits, and you make it clear that your time and energy are not to be taken for granted. Machiavelli's philosophy on respect also encourages us to understand that being respected is a two-way street. In a world where many people feel pressure to constantly give, we must remember that true respect is mutual. If you're constantly accommodating others but neglecting your own needs, you're not in a healthy, balanced relationship. True respect is about recognizing that everyone's time, Energy and values are important, including your own. By setting boundaries and communicating them clearly, you teach others to respect not only your time, but also your values, your limits, and your unique contributions. Furthermore, Machiavelli understood that respect is tied to a person's ability to act decisively and strategically. It's not enough to simply be nice or agreeable. One must also be able to make tough decisions, even when they are not popular. In leadership, as in life, there will be times when you must make decisions that others may not like. However, the ability to make these decisions with confidence and clarity is what ultimately earns respect. This is particularly true in situations where compromise is not possible or when standing firm is essential to achieving long-term goals. Whether in business, in relationships, or in personal pursuits, the ability to act with purpose and conviction is what earns others respect. For example, in a business setting, a manager may need to make a decision that is unpopular with the team. Perhaps they have to cut costs, restructure the department, or deliver tough feedback to an underperforming employee. While these decisions may not be welcomed by everyone, the manager who communicates the reasoning behind the decision clearly and stands firm will gain respect. They're not making the decision because they want to be liked or because they want to avoid conflict. They're making it because it is necessary for the greater good of the company and the team. The clarity and conviction behind their decision-making is what commands respect, even if the decision itself is difficult. Ultimately, Machiavelli's view of respect is grounded in the understanding that it is earned through strength, clarity, and the willingness to enforce one's boundaries. It's not about being liked by everyone. It's about being clear about who you are, what you stand for, and what you expect from others. Respect is not something you can beg for or demand through kindness alone. It is something you must create through your actions, your consistency, and your ability to make tough decisions when necessary. When you stand firm in your values, communicate your boundaries, and act with purpose, you not only earn respect, but also create the foundation for genuine, healthy relationships based on mutual understanding and trust. This is the true lesson from Machiavelli. Respect is not a byproduct of being nice or agreeable. It is a product of strength, clarity, and the ability to stand firm in your own values and principles. In a world that often values kindness above all else, it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that our worth is directly tied to how much we sacrifice for others. We are conditioned from a young age to be agreeable, to avoid conflict, and to constantly put the needs of others before our own. While kindness is a virtue, it can quickly become self-destructive when it turns into people-pleasing. The idea that being constantly nice is the key to building relationships and earning respect is a myth that leads many to compromise their values, ignore their own needs, and, ultimately, lose sight of who they truly are. In order to escape the endless cycle of self-sacrifice, we must reframe our thinking about kindness and learn how to establish clear boundaries that protect our well-being without abandoning the core of our compassion. The first step in breaking free from the goodness trap is understanding that our desire to please others is often rooted in a deep fear of rejection. We are taught that in order to be loved, accepted, and valued, we must always be helpful, agreeable, and selfless. This fear drives us to say yes, even when we want to say no, to give more than we can afford, and to let our boundaries be crossed without speaking up. The underlying assumption is that by constantly meeting the needs of others, we will gain their love, admiration, and approval. However, this cycle is unsustainable and ultimately leaves us feeling exhausted, resentful, and invisible. The more we bend to others' expectations, the less we are respected for who we truly are. Instead, we are seen as a resource to be used, and our value becomes tied not to our true selves, but to how much we can give or do for others. To break free from this pattern, we must shift our mindset. The key is to recognize that kindness does not require us to lose ourselves in the process. Being kind does not mean sacrificing our own needs, feelings, or boundaries. It means extending compassion to others without sacrificing our own sense of self. This shift in thinking involves redefining what it means to be good. Instead of equating kindness with constant self-sacrifice, we must learn to embrace a version of kindness that is balanced with self-respect and personal boundaries. One of the most powerful ways to begin this process is by setting clear boundaries. Boundaries are not walls that shut people out. They are guidelines that protect our energy, time, and emotional well-being. When we establish boundaries, we are not saying no to others. We are saying yes to ourselves. Setting boundaries is a way of communicating to others that our needs are just as important as theirs, and that we deserve respect. The act of setting boundaries is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of self-respect. It's a way to protect ourselves from being taken for granted and to ensure that we are not overextending ourselves to the point of depletion. For example, at work, setting boundaries might mean saying no to extra projects or tasks when you're already stretched thin. It might mean communicating clearly that you have set working hours and cannot respond to emails or requests outside of those hours. In personal relationships, setting boundaries could involve telling a friend or family member that you cannot always be available to listen to their problems, especially when you're dealing with your own challenges. It could mean standing up for yourself when someone makes unreasonable demands, even if it makes them uncomfortable. By doing this, you're teaching others how to treat you and ensuring that your time and energy are respected. The next crucial step is to recognize that we are not responsible for other people's happiness. The desire to please others often comes from a belief that our worth is tied to how much we can make others happy. This belief leads to chronic people-pleasing, where we continuously prioritize others' needs over our own in an attempt to earn their approval and avoid rejection. However, this mindset is flawed because it assumes that our value comes from external validation rather than from within. The truth is, we cannot control how others feel or what they think of us. We can only control how we treat ourselves and how we show up in the world. By placing the responsibility for our happiness on others, we give away our power and become dependent on external sources of validation. To break free from this, we must learn to take responsibility for our own happiness and recognize that it does not depend on the approval of others. For instance, consider a situation where you're constantly saying yes to a friend who frequently asks for favors, even though it inconveniences you. You may tell yourself that you are helping because you care about the person, but deep down, you're also hoping that your actions will make them appreciate you or validate your worth. However, by constantly sacrificing your own needs to please them, you are neglecting yourself and ultimately feeding into the belief that your value depends on what you do for others. In reality, this dynamic only leads to frustration and resentment because the friend may never fully recognize the extent of your sacrifices, and you may feel used and unappreciated. To break out of this cycle, you must learn to set boundaries and prioritize your own needs, knowing that your worth is not dependent on constantly pleasing others. One of the most important aspects of this shift in mindset is recognizing that setting boundaries and prioritizing your own needs does not mean becoming cold or uncaring. It does not mean that you have to turn into someone who is indifferent to others or unwilling to help when needed. Instead, it means learning to strike a balance between kindness and self-respect. It's about recognizing that you can be kind, compassionate, and helpful without sacrificing your own well-being. True kindness is not about giving to the point of depletion. It's about giving from a place of abundance, where your needs are met and your boundaries are respected. When you're able to give from a place of balance, your kindness becomes sustainable, and you avoid the burnout and resentment that comes with constant self-sacrifice. In relationships, this shift can be transformative. When we stop trying to constantly please others, we open the door for deeper, more authentic connections. By setting boundaries, we teach others how to treat us, and we create relationships that are based on mutual respect, rather than one-sided sacrifice. We also teach others that our time and energy are valuable and that we are not willing to be taken for granted. This not only increases the quality of our relationships, but also helps us feel more empowered and confident in our interactions. Another key element of breaking free from the cycle of people-pleasing is learning to accept and embrace discomfort. Often, we stay in situations where we are sacrificing ourselves because we fear the discomfort of saying no or setting boundaries. We may worry that others will be upset, disappointed, or angry if we don't accommodate their requests. However, discomfort is a natural part of life, and learning to sit with it is a necessary step in reclaiming our personal power. Saying no or standing up for ourselves may make others uncomfortable in the moment, but it is essential for creating healthier, more balanced relationships in the long run. For instance, when you begin setting boundaries at work, there may be an initial period of discomfort where colleagues or supervisors are not used to you saying no. However, over time, they will come to respect your boundaries and understand that you cannot always accommodate every request. Similarly, in personal relationships, standing firm in your needs may initially cause tension, but it will ultimately lead to more respectful and fulfilling interactions. Discomfort is a sign of growth, and by embracing it, we can create a life where we honor our own needs without feeling guilty or selfish. Ultimately, escaping the goodness trap requires a fundamental shift in how we view ourselves and our relationships with others. We must learn to value ourselves for who we are, not for what we can do for others. By setting clear boundaries, prioritizing our own needs, and accepting discomfort, we can stop living in fear of rejection and start living with confidence and self-respect. We can redefine what it means to be good by recognizing that kindness doesn't require self-sacrifice, it requires self-respect. And when we respect ourselves, we teach others to do the same, leading to healthier, more fulfilling relationships that are based on mutual respect, understanding, and balance. The journey of self-discovery and personal empowerment often begins with a crucial realization. We cannot continue living our lives solely to please others. From a young age, society trains us to believe that our value is tied to how well we meet others' expectations, how easily we can adapt to their needs, and how much we are willing to sacrifice to make them happy. But this mindset often leads to a life of silent self-erasure, where we lose touch with our true desires, our own voice, and our identity. It is easy to get caught in the trap of trying to be liked, trying to be the good person, but over time, we find that this endless people-pleasing leaves us feeling drained, invisible, and unfulfilled. We have to understand that true strength does not come from being constantly accommodating. It comes from knowing our own worth, establishing boundaries, and having the courage to live authentically. One of the most powerful shifts we can make in our lives is to begin seeing our value not through the lens of how much we can do for others, but through the lens of self-respect. It is not enough to just be good to others if we're not being good to ourselves. Respect for ourselves is the foundation of all meaningful relationships, whether personal or professional. If we constantly give without receiving, if we suppress our needs in favor of others, we teach people that our value is dependent on what we can offer them. In doing so, we deprive ourselves of the respect and consideration we deserve. To truly reclaim our lives and our self-worth, we must let go of the notion that being good means always saying yes, always putting others first, and always making ourselves small in order to fit into the mold others expect us to occupy. In reality, being good and strong are not mutually exclusive. We can be kind, compassionate, and generous while still holding firm to our boundaries, protecting our energy, and valuing ourselves. The key lies in striking the right balance. It is possible to be a good person without sacrificing our autonomy or our voice. It is possible to be empathetic and caring without letting others walk all over us. The true strength in life comes from having the courage to live according to our own values, not according to the whims of others. When we're able to say no without feeling guilty, to assert ourselves when necessary, and to stop apologizing for existing, we begin to live in alignment with our authentic selves. This is the power that comes from self-respect. It is not about being rigid or cold, but about being clear with ourselves and others about what we are willing to accept and what we are not. It is about recognizing that we are worthy of love, respect, and kindness simply because we exist. We do not need to constantly earn these things through our actions or by trying to please everyone around us. Many people live their entire lives based on the approval of others. They shape their decisions, actions, and even their thoughts around what they believe will make others happy or comfortable. This constant adjustment can lead to a life that feels disconnected from who we truly are. We become so consumed with meeting external expectations that we forget to check in with ourselves, to ask what we truly want, need, and desire. The result is that we slowly lose our sense of identity and find ourselves living a life that is not truly our own. Consider the workplace as an example. Many of us work tirelessly, trying to be the perfect employee, the one who never says no, who takes on every task, and who is always available. In the short term, this behavior might earn us praise or recognition. But over time, it leads to burnout, exhaustion, and a lack of genuine respect. People begin to expect us to always go above and beyond, to always be there for them, and to constantly sacrifice our own time and well-being for the sake of others. The truth is, the more we bend to others' demands without setting boundaries, the less we are truly respected. Instead, we become a tool to be used, a resource to be tapped into when necessary, rather than an individual whose time and energy are valued. In personal relationships, the same dynamic often plays out. When we prioritize others' needs over our own for the sake of maintaining harmony or avoiding conflict, we risk becoming invisible. We give and give, hoping that our efforts will be reciprocated with appreciation and love. But in many cases, the more we give without asking for anything in return, the more we are taken for granted. Our actions, no matter how well-intentioned, may not be seen as expressions of love or generosity. Instead, they become expected. The more we accommodate, the less respect we receive. People begin to assume that we will always be available, that we will always sacrifice our needs for theirs. This pattern leads to resentment and frustration because, deep down, we know we are not being treated with the respect we deserve. Breaking free from this cycle requires a fundamental shift in how we view ourselves and our relationships with others. We must begin to see ourselves as worthy of respect, not because we always say yes or make ourselves available to others, but because we are individuals with our own needs, desires, and boundaries. We have the right to assert our needs, to say no, and to demand the respect we deserve without feeling guilty for doing so. This doesn't make us selfish or unkind. Rather, it makes us strong and self-aware. The more we honor our own boundaries, the more we invite others to do the same. And when we consistently show up as our authentic selves, we begin to attract relationships that are based on mutual respect and understanding, rather than one-sided sacrifice. The cost of constantly trying to please others is high. We pay the price with our mental and emotional health, our self-esteem, and our sense of identity. The more we prioritize others over ourselves, the less we are able to recognize our own worth. We begin to lose sight of who we are and what truly matters to us. This leads to a life that feels unfulfilling, disconnected, and ultimately inauthentic. To break free from this pattern, we must start living for ourselves, not for others. We must stop thinking that our worth is tied to how much we can give, how much we can do, or how much we can please others. Instead, we must recognize that our worth is inherent. It comes from being true to ourselves, from living in alignment with our values, and from respecting our own boundaries. Living authentically requires courage, and it requires the willingness to accept discomfort, saying no to others, setting boundaries, and asserting our needs will often make us uncomfortable at first. People may push back, may express disappointment, or may try to guilt us into compliance. But these moments of discomfort are actually signs of growth. They signal that we are stepping into our power, reclaiming our time and energy, and setting the foundation for healthier, more respectful relationships. By embracing discomfort and standing firm in our values, we create space for deeper self-respect and, ultimately, a more fulfilling life. Ultimately, living a life of self-respect means that we no longer live for the approval or validation of others. We recognize that we are worthy of love and respect simply by existing. We don't have to earn it through constant people-pleasing or self-sacrifice. When we stop trying to please everyone, we free ourselves to live a life that is true to who we really are. We begin to show up as our authentic selves, unapologetically, and this is where true power and fulfillment lie. By living authentically and setting clear boundaries, we not only reclaim our own power, but also set an example for others about how to treat us with the respect we deserve. Wow, what a journey we've been on today. If you've learned anything from this video, I hope it's this: your worth is not tied to your ability to please others. You don't have to lose yourself in order to be loved or respected. By setting clear boundaries, prioritizing your own needs, and living authentically, you will not only protect your own well-being, but also build stronger, more respectful relationships. True strength comes from knowing who you are and having the courage to stand firm in that truth. The process of breaking free from the people-pleasing cycle isn't easy. It takes time, practice, and a lot of self-reflection. But once you start living on your own terms, you'll realize how much more fulfilling and empowering life becomes. No more bending over backward to meet other people's expectations. No more sacrificing your happiness for the sake of avoiding conflict. You have the right to be respected, to be heard, and to live a life that is true to who you are. If you found this video helpful and empowering, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another video. And if you want to support this channel further, consider giving a super thanks. Your donations help us continue creating meaningful content that empowers you to live your best, most authentic life. Remember, you don't have to choose between kindness and strength. You can have both if you know your worth and set the right boundaries. It's time to stop living for others and start living for yourself. So take that step today, be bold, be you, and start living a life of respect and authenticity. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay strong, stay true to yourself, and keep living your best life.